Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashrothi, the voice of New Eden, and this is January 6th YC125 Eve Universe Show. Welcome, guys and ladies. How are you guys? How's everybody doing? Okay, so we're going to start with the producer's letter. I'm going to start by probably more or less reading it, okay? Partially because I don't want to miss anything, and we might want to pick out individual things, but also because I only skimmed it the first time and was trying to get a general feel for things, because things happened relatively quickly today when it came to getting ready for the live letter, the dev chat that they had. All right. Uprisen Capsuleers. It is an incredibly thrilling time to be a Capsuleer in New Eden. This article was written as a combination by CCP Berger and CCP Ritati. Now, these are the two kind of pretty much the two top level executive kind of producer type guys. So they are the ones that look towards the grand vision and kind of how it all relates as it spans through time. For instance, in the chat, they got asked questions about upcoming ships. They didn't actually know about that because they're not the game designers. They're the systems designers, as it were. So that's who wrote this letter, okay? It is an incredibly thrilling time to be a Capsuleer in New Eden as we embark on a new year in EVE Online. The front lines have been buzzing with activity, and some big shifts are happening in the political landscape. Since the launch of Uprising expansion in November 2022, the activity in New Eden has exceeded our wildest expectations, with active player counts swelling since release and, more importantly, pilots being more active in space. Particularly notable has been the sharp 75% increase in PvP kills in low-sec, as well as the 11% PvP kill increase in high-sec, despite the additional restrictions on ganking and changing to Abyssal Dead Space following the release. This has pushed industry and mining significantly, with the Navy ship producing rising 14,709% and capital manufacturing seeing a 34% bump. Okay, so let's break that down. There's a lot of really fascinating stats there, okay? So first of all, 75% increase in PvP kills in low-sec. This should be pretty obvious, right? Like, faction warfare has been incredibly successful. This has led not only more people to be in faction warfare and fighting, but it to be more pirates going to faction warfare space to fight, and etc. And also you see a lot more, I guess I can't say that they're more expensive ships because they're not using T2, but I actually do see a lot more expensive ships insofar as like battle cruisers, battleships, etc. being deployed in faction warfare space. It's also worth noting that when they specified in the presentation that these stats, when they say 75% increase, they are comparing it to the 2 months prior to the expansion, which admittedly was kind of a low point for things. So, but, you know, keep that in mind. But the point of the matter is that we have a huge increase in low-sec PvP, which would be expected. But then there's this 11% increase in PvP in high sec, despite the fact that ganking had additional restrictions put on it. And remember, if you're talking about the 2 months prior to that, there's that whole time where there was like a big thing about ganking. All the gankers were mad and they were ganking extra ganking. So that increase is actually kind of significant. I actually suspect that that increase is because of the overall activity as a whole. In other words, as there's more people out there doing stuff, the population increases by 20 to 30%, then you would expect that everything would be increased by a certain percent. Now, that percentage might be suppressed by those changes that were made. And I'm not saying that this is 100% true, and I'm not saying that we've raised by 30%. I haven't done that math yet. But my point is that 11% could be explained by just an overall increase in new players in the game, people in high sec in the game, etc., etc. Not saying that like, ooh, people are ganking more, but there's more people that are ganking and more people to be ganked. People ganked more with more accounts during the free days. That's actually a really good point too, Solstice. I wonder how that averages out. That stat could theoretically be misleading. that we could actually see a huge spike in ganking during that period of time. What's funny is that it's contrasted with the Crimson Harvest, which also has a strong pressure towards ganking because you get 90% drop rate instead of whatever. So that's October. That's 1 month prior to the expansion. So that would have been in the pre-stat. So it is still a pretty impressive stat either way. 14,000% capital manufacturing is one of those stats that's so hilarious that it pretty much tells you exactly what's going on, right? This is happening because the faction dreads happened, right? If any faction dreads are happening at all, capitals require so many more resources than non-capitals that even if no other Navy ships started being produced, those capital ships being produced would massively spike the amount of faction production being made. In addition to that, faction production was also suppressed. Nobody built anything. Nobody built faction ships. You turned ships into faction ships using chips and LP because building them with BPCs was unprofitable as all get out. So again, kind of a misleading stat, but also it's 14,000%. It's also just a hilarious percent, right? It's 147 times more production. That's like cookie clicker numbers. All right. And capital manufacturing up by 34%. This is pretty good. This is probably a combination of Navy faction capitals being made, but also as we see a lot of returning players, plus the fact that capitals were now made to be much cheaper to be built again, means that, like the ability to build capitals was turned on a few months ago, but now the people are also coming back that are wanting to have those capitals. So we see a 34% increase in production. Again, this is compared to the 2 months prior to it, which was already when the capital forges were firing up again because the changes to industry had already happened. Now that we have entered a new year and marching towards EVE's 20th anniversary, we want to take a moment to reflect on last year. Blah. Uprising, making faction warfare an exciting area of space filled with action and intrigue was one of the big things aimed to address in Uprising. Territory control is a foundational aspect in EVE Online. We wanted to make it easier to find and participate in the action. Including Frontlines was the first big step to evolving this fundamental system and making it more dynamic. Along with Frontlines, new ships entered the war zone. Existing ships got rebalanced, complexes were reworked to make them fairer and more fun, and new battlefield sites were introduced. Together, this has created even more ways for players to get involved in and be rewarded for diving in the action. You know what's funny about this? Not only is this all true, I'm actually going to call them out that they almost like buried the lead, right? Because they missed other things, like the fact that the new exploration sites were introduced, the new rendezvous points, the advantage system. And yes, I know that it might be something to ask about, like reciting all that stuff in this kind of review, but my point is that even this statement, even though it seems almost lofty or whatever, is actually still underselling how monumentally successful this faction warfare update has been. I've actually been flying in faction warfare properly for the last few days, and the frontline system is just absolutely fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. As mentioned in the Faction Warfare dev blog that was released in December, the next big part of Faction Warfare equation is already underway. This next update, coming in Q1, will introduce a feature that we're called Direct Enlistment, which will allow players to join Faction Warfare without leaving their corporate alliance mates. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a shill. So remember, I got started being so vocal in podcasting and whatnot because I noted that everybody who was talking about nullsec, and nobody was talking about how awesome faction warfare was, and people were poo-pooing faction warfare, and I saw how awesome it was, and I wanted to help people understand how awesome it was. So, and this is, by the way, in 2013 to 2015, which is the exact time that everybody kind of speaks of the golden age of faction warfare back in the day. So I was right. I was just, people didn't want me to talk about it because they wanted their nullsec rhetoric. So yeah, no, I'm okay with being accused as a shill when what CCP did was all of the things I've been recommending since 2015, right? I'm not saying that they necessarily did it because I recommended it, but you can't expect me to hate the changes. I'm actually more pleased that like all of my theories, whether or not they did it because I'm the one that said it, what I've been saying has been vindicated over and over and over again since Uprising. So if anything, that's the reason why I'm excited. Okay, it's purely selfish. Anywho, the point is that what we have here is actually something really interesting, which is part of a broader thing that they talked about during the presentation, and that was the idea of these lanes. Now they mentioned 3 different lanes, and I'm not sure which ones or what is considered a lane and what's considered part of a lane yet. But one of the big things that they said was that there's heraldry. So they have teams that are kind of working on these things, and each of these features are like a piece of that puzzle, right? So like there's Empires at War, there's Operation Homefront. You know, there's these different terms that they said every once in a while. And heraldry was another one that they said was a big thing. So the emblems that we have right now is just the first piece of heraldry. Sorry, my bad. The allegiance system. My bad. That's what I meant. Sorry, I jumped topics there. The allegiance system is one of those like chains, right? So they want, and this goes into what I've talked about the allegiance system before, where, you know, I said maybe it probably got delayed because the allegiance system is actually way bigger than faction warfare. And I was right? Like when they say allegiance, what they mean is basically a fundamental reworking of allegiances, faction allegiances, you know, potentially even corporation alliance allegiances, et cetera, because they were talking about war decks and all that sort of stuff, which is technically potentially about faction warfare too, but they talked about that as being other issues within allegiance, not just faction warfare. So what they're doing is they are, rather than delay it until all of the allegiance stuff is ready, in the same way as they didn't delay heraldry until everything was ready with heraldry, they released what they could. So too, they're putting the biggest need forward. So rather than trying to complete the entire allegiance system, they're only doing the faction warfare section of it first as their first priority in that vein of production, if that makes sense. So what this will do is, in theory, allow you to join faction warfare and participate in faction warfare activities without having to leave your alliance. They didn't really specify whether or not this would bring on the restrictions of faction warfare. They did suggest that there could be a reduced reward, or rather a bonus reward for those who take the extra step to actually like fully align into faction warfare rather than just use this system to dabble in it. But we'll have to find out more about what that means when we get closer to it. But that is expected to be gotten within the next 2 to 3 months. Well, 1 to 3 months, right? So not only did the Uprising expansion overhaul faction warfare, but it also opened the door to personalization. As a Capsuleer, flying your colors allows you to celebrate your allegiance while sending a message to others about who you are. The new Paragon Corporation introduced a new currency, Evermarks, along with new agents, stations, and missions that enable you to acquire Corporation Alliance emblems. The real beauty, however, is that you cannot simply buy your way into these accolades. You actually need to undock and play. These results in more pilots in space, more opportunities for conflict, and more budding industrialists and traders, filling the need created by Paragon. As we move forward, we will add more ways for you to earn Evermarks through your in-game actions. The more recent example of this being the daily login rewards from the Winter Nexus event. So what we're getting there is that this goes into the fact that the Evermark system and the heraldry system, this is what I was just talking about, where the heraldry is just beginning with the emblems. But also, right now, the only way that we really earn Evermarks, or at least originally, was to turn in ships every day. But then there's login rewards, right? And they actually specified that as, and now we have another way to give Evermarks. So they can now give Evermarks as part of login rewards. So we could possibly see that in the future more commonly. However, I think that the bigger thing here, the thing that might have been missed, is the fact that what they drilled in on is the fact that Evermarks are actually loyalty points. Now, we all kind of deep down inside know that the Evermarks kind of piggyback on loyalty points to make this work. But what I hadn't considered until the video was that it goes the other direction too, right? Since Evermarks are in fact LP, any development that improves the way that Evermarks function is also an improvement to the LP store, right? So now other LP stores could theoretically give you bind on pickup emblems, which admittedly trends extremely closely to like the volatile skin problem. But I think this still to me works better. And I could go into why, but that's a whole long topic. My point is that I'm excited by the fact that not just the fact that they piggybacked on loyalty points, but really what we're seeing here is a loyalty points revamp disguised as a new feature. Right, exactly. The fact that, so the question was, how do we tax LP, right? And what Evermarks has proven is that now they can make it so that the corp has their own LP that generates on top of the current the LP that you earn. So that's really critical, right? Like, I don't know if these numbers are true, but if I get 1,000 Evermarks and I'm not in a corporation, I just get 1,000 Evermarks, right? If I am in a corporation, then I get 1,000 Evermarks and the corporation gets 100, right? The corporation gets 10% of my Evermarks. I'm not saying that this is the real numbers. I'm doing this for the ease of math. What this means is that the person who's earning the Evermarks don't have the loyalty points doesn't feel like the corporation's taking from them, but it still allows the corporation to earn LP too. So now in faction warfare, your corporation can actually earn, like, one of the problems with faction warfare is that there is no top level income built into faction warfare. All of the income streams are bottom up that are untaxable by the organizations. So the idea that other people all your corporation members plexing will also generate a small a pool of LP for the corporation as well, I think that's awesome. This reminds me of back in the day, there's a game called Asheron's Call, and I really, really, really loved the way that guilds and whatnot was done there, because the way it was done is it was a series of fealties. So I can swear fealty to somebody, and when I do that, now whenever I generate XP, I also give them a small amount of XP. Again, it doesn't take it from me, it just also generates it for them to encourage them to help, these people and make them want to swear fealty to you. The point here is that in Asheron's Call, there were skills that helped increase the amount of loyalty points, or rather experience points that you sent over, right? Your loyalty rank and their nobility rank, I don't remember if those were the actual names, controlled, like those stats controlled how much extra XP was generated for the boss man. So you could do something similar to that in the same way as, like, we have a skill that that makes us so that we get more rewards from missions. You could have a skill that increases the amount of LP that's generated for the corporation when you receive LP. The launch of Uprising saw new emblems become available for over 100 ships. It's not available on the Bustard. That's not fair. I'm pretty sure that's still true. With a further of 186 new ships on December 15th. No Bustard, no Marauders, no command ships. Just sad. We will continue to roll out emblems for more ships within the next batch planned for later this quarter. You can expect even more radical customization options in the future, from peacocking your kill marks to making your space and citadels, or marking your space and citadels. They talked about this Everything from putting up custom banners and customization on not just ensyllabic stargates, but even the NPC stargates in your own sovereignty. Things like storm clouds around your structures. While we brainstorm like what cool things could heraldry do based on what we understand about it, they are still thinking a little bit further outside of that box, right? What else can we do? Sure, structure skins are great, but what else could we do? I think that's pretty exciting as well. Our ambition has been to ease the pathway for new recruits to become battle-hardened veterans and contribute to the battles raging across New Eden. Having redeveloped the entry into the game while empowering new players with opportunities to develop the core skills to their spacefaring adventures, we can now shift our focus onto giving them more meaningful roles in the interstellar war effort. The main design question that we continue to ask ourselves is, how can we make new players become even more capable and ready to engage with empires, corporations, and alliances? Much of the Uprising expansion focus was geared towards PvP, but we also want to enable different methods of contribution to the war effort and accommodate more playstyles. If low-sec is the war zone, then high-sec is the home front, where bullets are made and boots are stitched for the front lines. That makes Operation Homefront make more sense now. As we start to look beyond Uprising, we'll be taking the learnings from faction warfare and applying them to other areas of space, with one of our focuses being on guiding players into more parts of the sandbox. We're smoothing the learning curve for novice pilots so that they can become valuable recruits for experienced capsuleers. The war machine requires scores of cogs to run efficiently, and capsuleers have a role and purpose, whether it is for fighting for territory on the front lines or supporting the war effort from the home front. Every item destroyed requires replacement, driving industry and mining, the backbone of New Eden. Okay, so the only thing I'm going to say about this, I mean, obviously this is pretty cool, especially since they're saying that they're happy with where they're at and they want to keep moving to the next thing, which is pretty cool. But the thing that they said that I thought was really interesting is that, you know, like, there's the old argument, like, Eve is a PvP game, right? We see this a lot. Even CCP says that Eve is a PvP game. And Eve has PvP, but even if once upon a time you could argue that Eve was a PvP game first and foremost, I think that didn't always necessarily have to be true, and was never 100% true, and is less true than ever. So, but what they did say is that Eve is a social game, and this is something that they do say a lot. This is something that they've always agreed with. And what I thought was interesting about that was that they said that if somebody wants to be independent, we want to give them encouragement and support, but then push them into fleets. They want people to have to fleet up more. That is a big goal of theirs. And so I think that's going to be really important to keep a bead on as we evaluate the changes coming up, because the idea of like giving the individual the confidence that they need, but then also the need to go fleet, it could go well or poorly. On the one hand, I know a lot of people that are very proud of their solo lifestyle. On the other hand, I feel like there is a glaring hole missing. I think that Invasions really did prove, chapter 1 and 2 especially, that there is in fact a pretty significant hole in Eve for organized low, mid, and even high tier PvE, group PvE. And but the other thing is that like we have to get past a lot of the stigmas. We're not going to get people to be able to fleet unless those fleets provide them some sort of protection, or at least confidence, right? So it's not just about giving them the activities to do as a fleet. It's about giving people better fleet tools to be able to do it with, to make that not painful. Because, like, most MMOs don't ask you to put yourself at risk by grouping with a bunch of strangers, right? In Eve, you are. If I make a delivery contract, the nature of that delivery contract are reinforced by the systems. I can have confidence in the systems. Therefore, I can have somebody haul my stuff. I have a system, the contract system, that provides the reinforcements I need in order to be able to trust other people, knowing that there are technically ways to violate that depending on how the systems get used. Does that make sense? So the issue is that right now, fleets, it's not just about making fleets safe. That's not what I'm asking. I'm saying let's make fleets not a bad idea, right? If I was a new pilot, or if you had a new pilot, newer pilot, and they were coming to you for advice, and they saw a public mining fleet up, and they were thinking about joining it and go, would you advise them that that is a good idea to do? I would argue probably not. And the issue is that it's not just about having something for the fleet people to do. That they're not asking you to teach them how to mine. They're saying that they want to go join this fleet, whatever it is. It could be anything. There's a new invasion fleet up, but it's a neutral fleet. It's just like a public fleet. Can I join it? Is that safe? What does that mean? What risks do I bring upon myself? How do I protect myself under these conditions? You know, in order for people to be able to go into periods of trust with one another, they're going to need a system to allow people to evaluate that trust better. And it may not be giving them protections insofar as making it so that they can't gank you. That's probably pretty unreasonable. The issue is more about making sure that everyone understands what is and isn't permissible within the fleet. Does that make sense? I don't think this is as big of a problem as the old school like corporation AWOXing thing. I don't think we're too far away from... I think this is a solvable problem. I'm just pointing out that it's more than just having the thing for the group to do. There are still things about the way that groups come together that probably need some work, just given the high paranoia nature of EVE Online. There needs to be... Or here's a better way of putting it. Rather than giving them protection, there needs to be things that you fleet up for that you use relatively cheap equipment that can't just be circumvented by a solo person using better equipment, right? Like, for instance, the 5-man plexes that only allow Navy. If there is a PvE version of that, now I can only bring, T1 and Navy ships. No one's worrying about billion-isk whatevers. We're just talking about 30 to 50, content that's designed to be ran by 30 to 50 million-isk ships. But still pays pretty good because it requires a lot of coordination or whatever. If you could create a toned-down version of an invasion site, even if you could do minor conduits, in such a way that it was gated so that it required you to have the cruiser or battle cruiser down, kind of like the solar deployment sites, how they're cruiser down, except for those don't have as much of a point and they're super dangerous for cruiser down. I don't think it's balanced correctly, but that same sort of concept. I think that there's space there for it to now be a good idea for newer players to open up the Fleet Finder, see a random fleet, join it, and have that not be the worst idea ever, right? That's all I'm saying. I don't know what that looks like, but I feel like that's what they're wanting. So, Solstice, though, you say that it's a PvE game with PvP elements nowadays. Here's the thing about that. first of all, CCP is the E in PvE. So the idea that everything, the majority of the content that CCP puts in is PvE makes sense. That's what they can put in. At best, the only thing that they can do is give PvE that you can fight over, like a battlefield or faction warfare, right? But like by definition, they are the E. So that's what they focus on. But here's the thing. What does that do for you? What do you need as a PvP pilot? You need other players. And you need other players that know how to play. And the way we get there is by having PvE that better engages players and gets people to fly together and as a fleet. If I can get 4 people or 5 people to regularly fleet up with 2 execs and 3 vexers to fucking run some PvE for a night, I can get that same group of people to then take that same fleet, now that they've gained some confidence in fighting, into faction warfare and fight it out there against players. That's the God honest truth. If you want good PvP, you want good PvE. This is 100% true. I know it's true because it's how we've done it. That's what we've been doing. The thing is that, like, we literally trained our Logi by taking them on the Zoria challenge. If a Logi pilot can heal, can hold in the Zoria challenge of the World Arc, they can be a Logi pilot in any PvP fleet there is, period. Where are those so-called PvPers? A lot of them are out there PvPing now. One of them is a goon, a couple of them joined Goon Swarm. A lot of them are an Aderon. That's how this works, man. People need to learn and grow confidence. And if we can let them learn and grow confidence as a fleet, then they will move to more challenging things as a fleet. My point is that I was using my group as I proved out the concept. Because this is actually happening elsewhere too. Like, this is happening all over the place. Ever since the war deck changes. You do realize that outside of high-sec ganking is killing PvP. Also, like, a lot of things is that, like, there's been a lot more high-end, high-sec PvP too, with structure fighting and the war decks. Like, I would argue that war deck changes improved the quality of warfare. In fact, like, made it so that there was more high-quality conflict in high-sec than before the war deck changes. You're right, structure bashing isn't PvP, but a 100-man Macarial fight versus a 110-man Cerberus fight is PvP. Turns out people defend their own structures too. An issue that many leaders face is the funding of these organizations. We hear this time and time again, where player corporations and alliance leaders of all sizes and areas of space need to lean on taxes and bounties for the goodwill of few through donation, or the goodwill of a few through donations to run their organizations. This is simply not sufficient for the myriad of different activities and groups rely on, such as Abyss running, loyalty point generation, market trading, wormhole blue loot, and more. Allowing avenues of taxable income will ensure that important programs like SRP will continue to allow novice pilots to take the steps into more challenging content and encourage more experienced capsuleers to take larger ships, to risk larger ships. We have already started experimenting with this through a one-to-one Evermark Corporation contribution. Oh, it's a one-to-one into the corporation wallet. This is just the first experiment with Corporation LP wallet, and it's something that we look to expand this year. We already talked about that. Oh boy, a lot of the war changes was about keeping players in the game and keeping social groups intact. Previously, a group of 10 friends had to stay in an NPC corp that shared chat channel. Now they can be in a corp together without getting war decked until they're ready to own a structure. Not only that, but what actually happens is time and time again, the group comes together and they're able to stay together and be successful until they get that structure, and then they anchor the structure, and then, a few weeks to a few months later, they learn that means that they can now be war decked, whatever the heck that means, and now they have skin in the game and an identity to fight over, and a lot of them choose to fight. Now, They often lose because they're a brand new group of barely put together people against an experienced War Deck Corp. But I don't have people coming to me saying, like, how do I get my stuff out? It's a lot of the time it's how do we fight it out? How do I get some way to defend this whole thing? Which is good. The internal metrics were 100-man high-sec group gets war decks, 70 of them stopped playing, and when the war expired, 35 of the 70 that stopped come back to the game. Exactly. You know, the war deck system, it didn't actually help spur conflict. It just made it so that you couldn't establish identity. On funding, we have prioritized contested income, formerly known as passive income, a source valuable enough to take, hold, and defend. In Uprising, we created several new gameplay systems and introduced in faction warfare that could also be applied elsewhere. The frontline system has shown that we can create high conflict zones, which are ideal candidates for these contested income sources, since they create areas of vulnerability. We much prefer this high-value sites in areas of substantial risk, rather than having highly defensible systems. I don't think they mention it here, but a good example of this is the AO Blue Star New Ore thing, right? By having certain systems have special value, now taking and holding those particular systems has special value. We believe that creating more ways for players to get involved in the war effort will set us on the path of creating the ultimate interstellar war machine, which in turn will make New Eden an even more vibrant place filled with excitement, intrigue, and infinite possibilities. Friendship machine to war machine. You've heard us talk about the friendship machine. We believe that the social connections made in New Eden are one of the most important aspects of EVE Online. People create meaningful friendships through fleets, corporations, and alliances. Running and operating these social entities can be very daunting, as well as taking the leaps to join them. But getting more players involved is incredibly important, especially in fleets, as EVE is best played with friends. Watching the emerging social organizations form in the war zones have been truly inspiring, where old and new capsuleers join forces in taking the objectives at hand. This is something that we've seen in public fleets, such as MPSI fleets, over the years, and something on which we wish to put more focus on in this next phase of development. Here's a good example, and this is a half-baked idea, okay? I'm going to start out by saying that. But an example would be, what if there was a fleet that, in order to be in the fleet, you must have safety green? I mean, obviously there's ways to work around that. There's ways that can be still a problem, but that's a potential example of how you could make fleets that voluntarily have conditions that would make them more enticable to public groups. That will be a dead fleet. Well, I mean, somebody could always drop fleet at the and then like join a different fleet and have people warp in and all that stuff. But at least at that point, like, there's a difference in warning and the backstabber is a bit more clear. That's what I'm saying. Like, you could still theoretically circumvent that. But I feel like the idea of like the peace not your sword is a potential way to just give them a little bit more, you know, at the very least, I can say, in the same way I can say that my corporation doesn't allow AWOXing, I can say that my fleet doesn't allow AWOXing. Fleets with a minimum sex status, that's a good one too. I think that these are potential ideas. Now, are any of them good? There's probably something wrong with all of them. The point is that we can't just tell people that they need to be in fleets unless we make that into a good idea, because otherwise they're just going to quit the game and think it's stupid. If we tell them that they need to be in a fleet, but being in a fleet is a bad idea, then they're just going to get a game that makes more sense. That's the real problem. Future of EVE evolved. With the Uprising expansion, immersion of EVE has been elevated to an even greater heights through visual and audio enhancements backed by significant performance and UI improvements. The new epic Upwell hangars allow you to marvel at your achievements, really convey a sense of scale in the stations and ships from the safety of your dock. Uprising also saw the release of several audio updates enhancing the sensory experience, and all of this supported by performance improvements and modern UI. Epic blur, yeah. The depth of field thing still needs work. Photon UI has been testing for the past 6 months and now has an adoption rate of over 91%. Thanks to player feedback, there's been several improvements, new features, and fixes made it to the process. Look, guys, I have heard all kinds of complaints still about Photon UI, but this is one of those things that when people start complaining about Photon UI, they quickly reveal that they have no idea what has happened to the Photon UI. Trust me, if you haven't tried it recently, check out the Photon UI and then go back through all of your windows and make sure to switch them to compact mode and turn off light mode and just see how well you like it. Okay? Just give it a shot. It ends up being pretty good. Over the last couple of years, we have carried out important foundational work that enabled us to build Uprising, our first expansion since 2018. We aim to continue releasing expansions of this caliber going forward with additional updates, more shining toys, riveting world events like the Stellar Transmuter incident, in-betweens to keep New Eden vibrant, active, and well-balanced. With the Uprising expansion, we took a big step towards realizing the future of war in New Eden, and yet there's still much more to come. We are thrilled to reveal our high-level roadmap in EVE Online for the year ahead. And we will be talking about this in depth in a little bit. We are kicking off this year with a celebration. EVE's lunar year will begin on the 19th of January, and alongside this celebration, we'll be bringing simplified Chinese to tranquility. NetEase has been pioneering the frontiers of EVE Online in mainland China and building a future for their two servers, Serenity and Infinity, for that region. We want to recognize our Chinese-speaking players outside of the mainland China that have built strong alliances and made their mark on New Eden over the past 2 decades. I find this really interesting. Like, somebody asked me, well, what do you think about the Chinese localization? And I was just like, it seems like a no-brainer, right? Like, in order for there to be the Chinese client, they would have had to have already had it be translated. Like, the work is done. So why wouldn't you integrate it? So, yeah, good. Makes sense. Furthermore, towards the end of January, the Microsoft Excel plugin, you know, I actually had that on my list of, like, things in 2023 that they talked about in FanFest that they just, like, suddenly stopped talking about, and so it was, like, in jeopardy. But nope, we got an update. Microsoft Excel plugin developed in collaboration with Microsoft will be soft launching in closed beta trial. Announced at FanFest last year, the integration will enable Omega capsulers to log in and directly pull in-game data from their Microsoft Excel. We believe that this is level the playing field by providing easy and simple access to in-game data without requiring coding knowledge. The official launch is planned on the EVE's 20th anniversary in May. So, like, I feel the thing I find weird about this particular thing, and this isn't even just hating it, this is just the thing that always gets me about this thing. People have unfair or uneven access to data. The people with the technical expertise have access to all of this awesome information. The average layperson does not. That's one of the problems that's trying to be solved here. But now what they're doing is they're making it so that, because, like, the goal of this is to make it available to everyone. But now they're making it so that it's available to everyone with a copy of Excel, right? I don't have a copy of Excel. I use Google Sheets. It's always felt kind of weird to me, where it's like, yeah, we're opening it up for everyone. I don't know. Microsoft Office Online is free, just like Google Docs. I wonder if this is going to work as good. Well, A, I need to look into that then. And B, I wonder if this is going to work with that. Either way, for more information on post-Uprising, blah, 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 blah. As we enter into the 3rd decade, we are one step closer to the mission. Yeah, got it. Cool. So, next, let's look at this real quick. I have a few things to talk about here. In the Q1 section, was it... I can't remember if it was them reaching out, but I remember, yes, you're right. I do remember that it was that Microsoft has been pretty active with it. But my point is that I'm not really complaining about it. I'm more just like, it's more of a tongue-in-cheek criticism, right? Where it's like, oh, you're making it accessible to everyone in a very capitalistic way. Especially since it's also Omega only. So it's like, yeah, it's accessible to everybody who paid money. Anyway, so Q1, we've got direct enlistment. We know about that. We've got faction campaigns, which we don't really know about exactly. I don't think I've seen this picture before. Nor, I'm not sure if I can recognize 100% what these structures are. This thing looks like it's trying to maybe be a Minakawa, but if that is, then this closer one doesn't feel like it makes very much sense. I also don't know if this picture is relevant to anything besides the fact that, look, the factions are fighting each other. It does look very much like a generic Caldari and Gallente fight, right? So probably nothing to read there. Local New Year's celebration and Chinese localization. So when we look at the Hobelix thing, stuff, we've got some stuff to look at there, but we've got very little information about what is going to be part of this Lunar New Year celebration. Whether or not this is going to be part of the, like, ongoing thing, whether or not this is going to be like because I mean, like, every year has a Lunar New Year, right? So that's cool. And then, of course, the Eve.xl. Now, the ones I really want to focus on, though, is this one and this one over here, okay? I have... Oh, wait, that one doesn't even show it. Hold on. That one. So, let's talk about my theory about these two. This one first. So, the first Eve expansion. Now, we've been talking about this quite a bit, all right? What this shows to me is that what the last faction campaign was about, and what the next faction campaign is likely going to be a continuation of, is the development of these stellar transmuters. What they can do, what they're used for, what their effects are, culminating in the release of players' abilities to make their own transmuters and deploy them as part of this expansion. So I feel like this picture is hinting that this expansion is going to be themed around the conclusion of those events, right? The developments of those transmuters and what they're capable of. All right? This one I find also interesting. So I don't know how much I can read into this. There's a part of me that wants to be like, oh, look, there's a person on the ground. This is a hint that it's connected to the shooter or whatever. But it's worth noting that this person on the ground is Lady Catis Tashmerkon. And this is the Amarian Golden Fleet laid out in front of her, right? In fact, I think this is even from the Uprising trailer. So, it's hard to read into that if this is something that, like, it's hard for me to say, yes, this is about the shooter, per se. Like, I feel like that's a bit of a stretch. It does seem to suggest that we will continue a focus on the empires, or these two pictures are completely random. I just don't feel like that's the case, right? CCP is way too cheeky about the way they do things. The chances that these pictures are at least some sort of cheeky hint is very high. Yeah, I think that that's going to be interesting, especially since direct enlistment also is going to require, like, a ramping up of things, a kind of call to arms. Which is why I may actually temper my prediction from yesterday, which is that the next faction campaign is going to start this month. I realize that, like, with direct enlistment coming, although they did say it's probably going to be sooner than we would expect, I assume that direct enlistment and the faction campaign are going to be entwined together. In other words, there's going to be some sort of call to action that's going to involve loosening the restrictions of which Capsuleers are able to participate in the Emergency War Powers Act, Militia War Powers Act, right? That those two things are going to be kind of connected. 10-1 goons make a mockery of it? Well, I mean, the thing is that it's hard. I mean, like, technically they already did that once, but the worst they can do is just participate in it. No, they said Q1 and also sooner than we would expect. So, and they were talking more broadly, like, not about any individual change, but they said that, like, things are coming before that we would expect. And in the context of within the Q1. In other words, it is within the next 3 months, and there's probably stuff coming out this month that we would expect to come out in the month after or the month after. That's how I interpreted it. It's also worth noting that they said that the Rifter, the new Rifter model, is coming out on Tuesday, which means when we look at HoboLeaks, that is, we can assume that basically everything on HoboLeaks is going to be patched over, which isn't much, but we are going to get a minor patch next week, unless they add more stuff in all of a sudden. Switch Empire based on profit, refuse to fire on court mates. Well, again, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of emergent behavior comes out of it. So this has me very excited. They were talking about improvements to the UI, and these are mini widgets. So, in other words, rather than having your entire inventory window, you can just have this little bar that says how full your inventory is and allows you to swap between inventories right here. Rather than have my big window of locations in space, I can just have this with a drop down that I can set. So I can preset what bookmark I want this thing to be paying attention to, and then click on warp to there. That is huge. And this one, which I got it from our Discord, so somebody circled it. The idea that local will now just give you a report of how many of each thing is in local. How long have we been asking for that, right? And you can even have a shorter version of it. I was happy when you could compress local the way you could. The fact that you can't do it, the fact that you can get this is awesome. Now, the thing is that, here's the thing. This feature is already in the game, kind of. Like, they're stating it as if it's like a brand new feature. But that's not fully genuine, because like you can go like this. This is what I like to do, okay? So I have my chat window up here, right? But if I double click on the window header, it window shades, right? So you can minimize things like that, and then you can just have it. Now, obviously, this is an improvement to this because it gives me the information on there too. But really, all they're doing is doing an improvement to this function. All I really want is for it to stay shaded when I tell it to, right? When I like, how many times it's actually really hard for me to keep this shaded and also, you know, like bring it in and out, especially since the window, the space that I can double click and not accidentally click on a tab or click on the open channel or click on the menu. Like the amount of pixels that I have to work with, especially if it's like this, it's like, where can I even, there we go. So, yeah. Happy to see improvements about that, though. The idea of the probe scanner is kind of weird. But maybe. The directional scan one's great. I just see having a stack of these, right? As your intel. I love it. I love it. And I think that might be it for that, for visuals. Let me see. Any other notes? So yeah, they expressed that there's a 20 to 30% increase in player activity. So that goes back to my original point, which is that like if you see a 20% increase of player activity and an 11% increase in high-sec PvP, that just makes sense. Yes, these are from the stream. In fact, that still suggests that the changes had some suppression effect on high-sec PvP, but not enough to overcome the overall increase in activity. So one of the things I found really interesting was that when they referred to the Stargate Trailblazer event, remember, these guys know about things from a very high level. Like, for instance, when they were talking about the API, he actually didn't remember, he didn't know the history of the API off the top of his head. That makes sense if you think about it for a long time. So the way that they refer to things can help understand what they value from it. And what they stated was, they talked about the stain Stargate construction. So out of all of the Stargate constructions that was happening, the one that stood out to them was the stain one. Now, they were bringing it up in the context of the development of faction campaigns. So what they were saying is that the lesson that they learned from the Stain Gate was that players were upset that they weren't able to stop it. And so because of that, anytime we see the faction campaign concept, right, which are these things right here, so the Othanoon campaign and the Transmuter campaign, these are not going to be fluff things. By definition, faction campaigns are going to bring forth a change in the universe. That is a rule now. So that's interesting. They referred to lore people as fanatics, which, thanks, I guess. Yeah, we got to give things to the fanatics, too. No, I'm just kidding. In reality there, though, what I really liked was that they touched on the idea of having an understandable story, right? If a game is actually going to pull in new players, then you have to make it something that you can pitch. You have to make it something that you can explain to your friend that doesn't play EVE. And the nuances of sovereignty and goon swarm and coalitions and all that kind of stuff is at best overwhelming and at worst uninteresting to the average person. But the space drama that is playing out in the actual lore is a story that people can actually talk about outside of the context of the mechanics of the game and make people understand it, right? Hey, look, the Amarr accidentally blew up one of the stars. The Gallente invaded these two constellations and seized control of it. The Caldari have moved into Nullsec, or the example that they gave, Niarja's gone now, you know? Like, these are the things that makes people... It was accidentally because that was not the intended effect. I actually am of the opinion that if all three of the transmuters were held by the Amarr and the Amarr completed their project in time, they would have actually completed the loop that they were looking to create. The Minmatar took two of the transmuters and completed their research project, which is what allowed them to safely shut down those transmuters. But in the process, I believe, this is 100% conjecture, that the rules were, if the Amarr hold all three, then they get their linked up thing. If the Amarr do not hold all three, then the remaining ones blow up. That's what I think happened, but I have no idea for sure. They did stress the fact that events are going to be massaged in order to fit into the story, which is what we saw a little bit of last year, where like each event kind of plays into what's going on, with the Easter event being connected to the... Was it? No, it was the Angel Cartel one. The Guardians Gala was about, or Easter one was about capital ships. The capital ship production rebalance. Oh, there was an interesting question about attributes, which I found even more interesting that they hummed and hawed about it. Kind of implies that the idea of like the big end-all state of it, with removing attributes, like that high level, or that big threat that they mentioned in FanFest, is a pretty long ways to be to realize. As they said, that they have these different lanes. So the Operation Homefront is about high-sec and newbie player stuff. Empires at War is about like faction warfare and how warfare plays out in general. And Heraldry is about how we customize our appearance and have personalization. And I think that is actually the three lanes that they were referring to. So yeah, attributes would be in the Operation Homefront lane, but not necessarily near the front of it. Yeah, I don't know. The thing is that the attribute thing is a complicated thing, and I've talked about it before. I don't feel like drilling too deep into it now. I believe that attributes serve a purpose, but I also have accepted the fact that maybe it's a relic of a bygone era that isn't quite working. I still believe that it can be fixed by the simple addition of two additional buttons on the skill queue page. Have a button that says remap to this skill queue, and when you click on it, it brings up the remapper that is remapped to be optimal to whatever your skill queue is, and it tells you how much you save because of it, just like Evemon would. And the other one is a button that says reset remap. that automatically resets you to 2020, 2020, 2019 without using a remap. Those two things. That's it. That's all you need.